Hello and welcome to the Infinity Saga and Beyond, an MCU fan podcast. My name is Jordan, and with me today for a special interview is Kelli Fitzpatrick. How are you today, Kelly?
I'm fantastic. Thanks for having me here.
Thanks for coming on, and we're going to be discussing her latest book, Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers Declassified, Notes, Interviews, and Files from the Avengers Archives, which comes out in March of 2025. And I just want to also apologize to you and to the listeners for my cold that I am fighting off here. Yeah, so before we get into your book and the questions I have pertaining that, usually when I have a new guest on, I like to ask some general questions. So I guess what would be who is your favorite Marvel hero? Is it Captain Marvel or is it somebody else?
Yeah, so Captain Marvel is definitely my favorite hero, but I have many sort of favorites among the pantheon. I've also always loved Iron Man. I absolutely loved the MCU movie that
Hmm.
came out, and Carol Danvers and Tony Stark obviously have a long and complex history together in the comics. So I really like Carol's arc for a lot of reasons. I enjoy the fact that she's really driven. She's had multiple careers. She worked for NASA, she was in the Air Force, she was an intelligence agent, she was an editor of a magazine, amongst many other things. And so I've always sort of respected the level of professionalism that she has and her commitment to these different endeavors that she takes on. She really brings her full self to each and every one of them. And she also just is resilient as heck. She does not give up, and she's had to kind of reinvent herself a lot of times. So I really, really have always been inspired by her. And Tony Stark is just cool,
Yeah.
interesting, and has cool technology, and has some also interesting sort of redemption arcs in his story. So, yeah.
Okay, how about your favorite Marvel film? It could be MCU, it can be the prior before MCU, the Fox films, whatever.
Oh gosh, this is hard. Okay, so I really, I really like Thor Ragnarok because it has unending replay value
Mhm, mhm.
because it's just so hilarious. I really liked the first Captain Marvel film. I thought it was really fantastic. And Avengers Endgame because it's so epic and inspiring to see all of them sort of assemble and come together.
Right, yeah, Endgame, man, I wanna live that again, movie theater experience. That was
Right.
just a culmination of, 10 years at the time.
Yes, and not a dry eye in the theater I was
No.
in anyways.
Okay, so I guess let's dive into the book. So, one of my questions I usually have for when I see a book on the shelf like this is how does this come about? Like, do you have an idea for this? Is it something Marvel is looking for? Is it something that the publisher is looking for? And then they reach out to authors for this. Like, when it comes to like specific Marvel branded ones like this, or, like the Star Wars book, stuff like that, like, how does that come about?
Yeah, so this is known as a tie-in book,
Hmm.
a media tie-in work, and those are typically invitation projects. So the publisher often will have a license to make an officially licensed product with the IP, in this case Marvel, and then they will, through whatever process they use, identify an author that they think would be a good fit for the project, and then reach out to them to offer them, would you like to take on this project? And so that's very similar to the process that happened here. Media tie-in work is really fun. I got my start doing it with the Star Trek universe. I did a short story for the Star Trek Strange New Worlds anthology in 2016, and then wrote for the Star Trek Adventures tabletop role-playing game. And so I had some experience with tie-in writing, and so when this opportunity came along to write in the Marvel universe, and particularly for my favorite character, it was a really a dream project.
Yeah, sounds like it. That was one of the things I always wonder is like, like you mentioned, Captain Marvel being one of your favorite characters or your favorite character. It's like, how lucky is that then to be, the one that gets to write this book? So that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's partly by design, right? They sought out someone who they think was going to be very excited and had some knowledge about the character, but also just, from a first person perspective of like getting to do this, it's incredibly exciting. Also a little nerve-wracking because you wanna do the character justice,
Hmm.
right? This is a character with such a rich history, as you know, and so it's really kind of a double-edged sword of, you know, with great power comes great responsibility, like
That's true.
yeah.
So how does like the format come about then? Is that something that you decide, or is that another like publisher part here? Because like this is a for people that don't know, it says in the title, notes, interviews, and files from the Avengers Archives. This has like interview style. There's files and memos. There's photos. There's like newspaper clippings, book excerpts. All of that kind of stuff. How does that come about, and how did you organize all of that?
Yeah, so this is such a cool organizing like structure for a project. I've never worked on something that was quite this unique. Um, and so this is part of a larger series that Ben Bella, the publisher, has been working on with Marvel for a couple of years now. So there are previous books in this line that focus on Iron Man, Black Panther, and Captain America, written by Dayton Ward, Kevin Dillmore, and Maurice Broaddus. And so they follow that same format of this idea that there's been a group of files that have recently been declassified that are going to shed some light on this character's story, kind of elucidate, the history that is in the comics, but maybe in some new and fun formats. And so this book carries on in that tradition. So that was very much part of the assignment that was given to me. As far as like how to go about executing that task, they gave me a lot of freedom in the pitch that I proposed to them about like what's the framing device and how like, what should these individual pieces of media in this book actually be, what formats and things. And so it was very much a collaborative process, but they allowed me a lot of creative freedom in kind of carving out like what makes sense for Carol's story in particular, and how that should be told through these files.
That's interesting. So with doing that, like how does the research go for this? Is it a lot of thumbing through comics and or Wikipedia entries, stuff like that, to find like what you want it to focus on or bring up? References like you mentioned the Tony Stark relationship reference that is brought up in the book as well.
Yeah, this was an extremely research intensive project, as you might imagine. And so the research involved several sort of different facets. So one of them was sort of this primary research of going back to the comics, and particularly the comics runs that focus on Carol.
Hmm.
So the Miss Marvel and the various Captain Marvel comics, her origin in the sort of original,
Right.
Marvel comics, and then like her parts in the Avengers and the X-Men, and she becomes a part of a lot of different teams.
Hmm.
So going back and doing a deep dive on like rereading these comics and taking copious notes and sort of deciding like which of these events and arcs are really essential to her story that really have to be in the book, which maybe little fun things can I include that maybe aren't essential, but like, come on, we got to get like, the flirkin, in here, so there was that layer, and then there, also necessary to reference some of those summaries to kind of make sure that the continuity was right
Right.
and that there's nothing major that we're missing because Carol's story is so comprehensive and she's pulled in on so many sort of like big events. So anytime there's like a giant battle going on in
Yeah.
the Marvel universe, she's probably involved. So there was a lot of sort of hunting down little pieces here and there, but it was so fun to get to return to some of these, events that I knew about, and then kind of rediscover little pieces of like, oh, this is such a cool little detail.
So I didn't know about the other books in the series, but I feel like this is
Mhm.
something that is kind of unique to Carol in the sense of you know, she's a very interesting case for this because she does have so many different aliases she does go by. Like Captain America has a few, right? Iron Man, has some, but like this is like, we even have a what excerpt when she's talking about being binary and how it was like her most like rewarding or like alias that she had and stuff, and it made me sit there and think like it is crazy to kind of chart that out and just think that like a character could have like a favorite alias that then but like is not the one that they're using right now. Like but like I think that's very interesting about Carol and all of her aliases, and I bet that was something that took a lot of research as well, and timeline mapping of when is she this, when is she that one.
Yes, absolutely. The timeline and the continuity was really key because there's actually some times that she like reverts to an earlier she's Miss Marvel, and then
Right.
she goes back to being Miss Marvel at one point, and so that was sensitive to have to get that right. But there was also this larger question of constructing a coherent identity for this one person who has been so many different roles over and so many different careers over the course of her life. And so that was a major challenge in the book, was finding that through line and tying it together in a narrative arc that made sense. So yeah, it was fun to leverage all these declassified files and found documents and transcripts and flight logs and all of these sort of
Hmm.
little pieces of ephemera to kind of fill in those gaps and give us the bridge that um, would maybe help connect all of that together, because I really so many cool things have been done with this character.
Hmm.
But I really did want this to feel like the story of one life as you're going through and reading it.
Yeah, and I think that is something that is very like needed because a blessing and a curse of the comics, right, is that there are so many different writers that will have their stamp on a character and might feel inconsistent depending on who's writing a character or not. So, having them feel cohesive is definitely a big part of that. When you were just mentioning how you found some little facts that you wanted to throw in, or that may not be totally relevant to Carol's like character or story, but you wanted to throw in like a fact or a reference to the comics. What one would you say is like the one that you really wanted, that you're like, I gotta throw this in somewhere?
So Carol mentions several times that she is a geek and she makes Star Wars jokes.
Hmm.
And so I really wanted to kind of slip that in there. And so if you look carefully, there are a couple of little Star Wars references here and there, which were very fun. But I also, because she worked for NASA, I wanted to make sure that sort of cosmic celestial experience of being a true space dweller made it into this book. So I think she's, most well known for her identities of Captain
Hmm.
Marvel and Miss Marvel, but this character of Binary who has the power of a binary star and can just fly through space, it has always been just fascinating to me. And so I put some special attention into developing the media and her reflections on that part of her story because I think it's really special and unique and cool.
Is that your favorite alias of Captain Marvel?
It
Binary.
is.
Um, what was something that maybe you learned about the character, even though she's already your favorite character in the Marvel realm, but something you learned while writing this book that you're like, man, that gives me a new appreciation for Carol.
Oh man. Okay, let's see. Um, because I learned several things about her while doing this, and some of it was just because if you sit down and, like, read something all the way
Yeah,
through, you start, like, connecting things that, um,
it's like rewatching a
you
TV show or a movie after you know what happens. You're like, oh, now I'm picking up stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, so I think, like, the her Alpha Flight station arc, where she's, kind of commanding this space station is I just when I read it, like, all the way through, it's just really great science fiction. I never really, like, saw it that way, but I think it just gave me additional appreciation for Carol as a leader and particularly as, like, planetary defender. Like, that is one of her roles that she plays, but the her role on that station she has, like, a first contact negotiation that she has to
It's very Star Trek,
it's
right?
very Star
Like,
Trek, yeah,
we're on a
yeah,
space
and
station.
yeah, and I mean, obviously, I'm a huge fan of Star Trek, I've written for Star Trek properties, and so, I just recognized, like, wow, this is really good writing, it's really good, sort of in its own right, and I like who she is, in that arc in particular.
Awesome. So we also had some questions here about because you're writing this book and it has like all of these different files and excerpts and different perspectives of characters. Did you find it difficult to get into the perspective of multiple different characters and their opinions on Carol?
Oh, yeah, so I think the tricky parts here were, um, one thing that's always true of tie-in fiction is you have to nail the voice
Mm-hmm.
of the character, like, you have to convince the reader they are reading Wolverine. That is Wolverine talking,
Right.
And so, some characters are trickier than others to really kind of get them fine-tuned, and so I found Tony Stark was fairly straightforward,
Mm-hmm.
Wolverine was fairly straightforward, a few of the other Avengers, took a little, like, warming up to, for me to feel like, "Okay, yes, I've sort of settled in," and, you can just go back and just read the comics to just kinda, steep yourself in that, but I think the most difficult thing was tracking who was on good terms with who at what point in Carol's timeline, because she has such a very long arc here, and there's lots of, like, "We're friends, we're enemies, we're frenemies. Actually, this person's dead now temporarily,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they're not around," like, and so,
Civil War
like
2, all that stuff.
yes, and so that, I think, was the most difficult thing of, like, figuring out, "Okay, when is this piece of media where does it fit in the timeline and how should those relationships kind of bear out?" But it's a fun challenge to do that.
Yeah, no, it sounds very fun to try to get into all of those characters' heads. Like you said, it can be very like when you're reading something if it rings true or not. So you gotta nail it, and that's got to be tough and kind of like worrisome while you're writing, sitting down to write this. Like I can't imagine.
Thankfully, that's what good editors are for, and I had fantastic editors both at Ben Bella, the publisher, and at Marvel, who were able to offer insight, into, if there was any tweaks needed.
That's good. That's awesome. Was there ever an intention with writing this book to help like provide new fans an entry point into the character in an easily consumable way? Like, is that something that these books are kind of setting out to do, um, or anything you had in your mind while you're writing this? Like, this might be somebody's first time. Like, they may have seen the movie Captain Marvel and don't know the comic stuff and be picking this up.
Sure. So I can't speak to the original intentions of them creating the line of books, but I can say that one of my goals in writing this was that I wanted this to be a book that could be picked up by a longtime fan of the comics who's read everything, and they would still find an engaging story that interests them, that maybe offers them new perspectives on events they already knew about, right? But also that it could be picked up by someone who knows nothing about the Marvel universe, and they would still be engaged with the life of this woman who is really compelling, really interesting, and that gives them enough context that they're going to enjoy the ride. So that's a huge breadth to try to span, you know. But I sincerely hope that that ends up being the case. And I think this is a great entry point into uh, not just the Marvel universe, but particularly the comics universe. Like, if you've seen some Marvel movies and you're curious about, like, well, what's going on in the comics, this book gives a lot of, it touches on a lot of that cool stuff that's happening there. So I think it could be a cool opportunity for folks to, jump in.
Yeah. And I guess one of my last questions here, if you could write another one of these for another character, whether Marvel, DC, any comic character, like who would that character be?
Oh, that is such a hard choice. Um, I think I can narrow it down to, I've always loved the Vision.
Mhm.
So writing Vision's story would be really great. And I love, Scarlet Witch and Black Widow. And so writing any of their stories, they've got pretty rich histories. Because you really do need, for a book like this, you need a character that's been involved in a lot of stuff,
And around
uh,
for a while.
around for a
Yeah.
while, lots of history with lots of different characters, across the universe. So I think those characters fit the bill. But yeah.
Yeah, those would be interesting, especially like Vision and Scarlet Witch. You could even maybe do a twofer there. Or I'm thinking like Vision could have some sort of like computer code segments in there instead.
Yeah, that one would be really fascinating.
um, okay, well, I guess that's all the questions I had about the book. But I didn't know if you wanted to, say anything to the listener out there who maybe like pitch it again or anything that you think about for this book, which is coming out in March.
Yeah, I really wanna highlight that this is the first time that Carol is telling her entire story in her own words. So the book is set up as a series of interviews between her and her sort of former nemesis, Ripley Ryan, who goes by the alias Star. And so they have this series of interactions with each other, and then it's supplemented with all of these files that we've been talking about. But it really is an opportunity for this very powerful, very well-known character to kind of dig into her personal life, her struggles. Like, she goes through things that she considers mistakes, things that she has considered challenges. Some of the times when she's kind of been forced to go through things more than once, and how she dealt with that. And I also really tried to portray some of her friendships and the connections that she's able to build. So, yeah, I think that if you are at all interested in superheroes, and particularly if you're interested in stories of really cool female characters, you would probably enjoy this book.
Thank you. Did you want to share where anybody can find you? Like, I don't know if you are, social media, anything like that that you want to share?
Sure. So my website is my name, Kelly with an I, Fitzpatrick.com. And you can find all my publications and such on there. And then on social media, I'm on BlueSky, and my handle is at Kelly Fitz Writes. And I'm happy to chat. If you read the book and you have thoughts, I'd love to hear about what you thought about the story.
Awesome. We're on Blue Sky as well. Uh,
Yeah.
but thank you so much for coming on here and talking about the book. It's been a really great experience getting to see, how that process is, and getting to talk about that and dive into some comic stuff. It's been great.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Jordan. It's been a pleasure.